Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Built to Scale. And as you can see, my background is still a little bit different for this episode. I just did a recording the other day, Ryan, that usually I have my home office, but I'm lucky enough that my family gets to travel down to Chile. That we have, my wife is Chilean, and so we're down in South America. So I'm bundled up for a cold winter day down here while we're recording this at the end of May. And but it's funny because this probably should be my office. My father-in-law has like an engagement photo of my wife and I over there. And a little bit different setting, but very excited. Ryan is our first guest. And for our audience, Ryan is our first guest in a series of episodes where we are going to deep dive on AI, AI's application for construction businesses. And we're probably going to hone in, and not probably, we are going to hone in on some of the accounting and finance relevancy of this. That, the reality is accounting and finance departments, finance functions and finance strategy depends a lot on data. And AI can help harness that data, right? And so, really thankful to have Ryan on the show today. Ryan, you mind giving a little bit of background about yourself for our audience?
Absolutely. I'm Ryan Seifert. I help run Teric Technology. We do technology consulting, data, and AI. So I'm ready to dive into all this. We generally help companies figure out where and how to plug in AI, what the ROI should be around that, and actually how to make it effective for the team to adopt and to use. Because if you build something that no one uses, you miss the mark.
That's something I want to dive into for sure. But I'm going to pose a little bit of a challenging question here, right? That the big debate is that, AI is going to take over humans' jobs and all this and that, and that, is going to put a bunch of people out of work. But I know you and I have had separate conversations, especially about, human intervention in AI. That AI is a tool that, walk us through your opinion on, major enterprise AI application for construction businesses, that big projects, that what's the likelihood that it's going to completely wipe out somebody's job and that there won't need to be human intervention throughout management of that AI? What does that look like in your opinion?
I use AI all day, every day. It is fantastic. It makes people much more effective. It's not necessarily going to replace people's jobs. Change jobs, absolutely. Make them more effective at what they're already doing, sure. But full autonomous, that's been very, very hard to see. You see AI come in with hallucinations. Someone has to go in and check those. We've had situations and setups where we have AI checking the output of another AI, and it just kind of starts to feel like there really isn't a great solution to getting full automation in there. And it's just part of how the technology works. I can geek out and kind of walk it through, but you still need a person to validate the output. And that's just that part isn't going away.
Yeah, I mean, I remember we try to be very careful of how we use any data in AI, especially a tool like Claude, that we just feel like there's some data risks there. And but if I need to build something from scratch, like just like something in regards to just like a weird scenario that doesn't involve any client data or any personal data, but just, hey, help me see if we did sales at this, under these scenarios, or we're developing this comp plan, and it's totally like blue ocean, kind of thing. I gave it a prompt. I felt like I gave it a good enough input, and it totally screwed it up. Like it was bad. And when I peeled it back and I gave it a much easier prompt, that it was like a 1 or 2 step prompt, and it was less of like a bunch of if then statements, like if that, because otherwise it basically felt like it produced a black box that I couldn't understand its math. And so, yeah, I mean, it's a tool that can help you be efficient. I agree with you, but definitely some human intervention that, um, the reality of like, what do you feel like in regards to how companies should be thinking, like quality control, what are the what are the highest risk points that really companies need to be thinking about, that, okay, we can implement AI, but like we have to have human control points here. Like we cannot be releasing this out to the job site, to our clients, out for bids or anything without these steps of human intervention, throughout this process. Walk us through what your thoughts are on that.
You hit a very interesting spot because there is such an amount of more depth in where you want to put those human in the loop checkpoints than I think people initially realize. So your question hits a very interesting spot for us. Ultimately, we want to look at the business process and figure out when is something changing hands. When is there a solid doable that someone can review quickly? Because ultimately, the other question we haven't hit on this one yet is if AI produces something and misses, whose fault is it? And you have to field that internally. Ultimately, it's the person who reviewed at fault. It's a tool, just like anything else. I think there's a lot of areas for companies to start to figure out how to leverage AI, but I think the first step most companies need to make is realize it's a tool. It's a calculator on steroids. It's not a magic wand. It's not going to come in and fix all your different areas. It's a tool, and you use tools appropriately. I don't want to go try and screw something in with a hammer. That just leaves a mess. Same thing with AI. So understanding where and how to apply it is the first step, and then getting your team on board that it's a tool. It's not going to take their jobs. It's not going to replace them. It will move their focus around. It'll make them more effective. But that first, almost cultural step is where we see a lot of that friction. Either there's unrealistic expectations for it to come in and do stuff, or the team is highly resistant to it, which we're seeing more and more often.
Yeah, I find, especially if you're using it to produce something that, like, and I know that this is a small use case, but like, you could use it to produce, say, like a job contract or like some type of short service agreement. At the same time, like, yeah, you can get a lot of the legwork done, but you still want a proper legal review of it. I mean, I used it to create a job description. I gave it a prompt that was a page deep. And it created a job description and a comp plan for me. But you better believe that I still had to have two people spend multiple hours to still review that. Now, it was great because it developed something that like sometimes it feels like half the battle is just like, where do I start? And like, how do I get going? But the element of like, you still have to check it that it could say something completely blatantly wrong in there, and you have to have that human intervention. Just it's so real. And I hope that, for anybody that hasn't been testing AI tools, if you go in and test again, you're gonna experience this yourself. Great that it can get 90% of the work done. You still got to apply that 10 to 20%, right?
That's again how the tech works. So it'll get close. It'll help you get most of the way there, but then you need someone who actually understands the material. That's the other gotcha I see on some teams. Someone can review it. We'll give it to someone who's new or can do it cheaply. Kind of works. And they'll catch some of them really blatant pieces, but the subtle ones, that's where it gets messy. And you see this across many different fields. There was a few years back, there was one on AI citing a source for a legal case that did not exist. Straightforward, easy to miss, something paralegal can probably have gone and checked, but didn't. And so there are these pieces where it'll just make pieces up. It's really bad at math. There's just areas you have to watch for.
Can you explain that for our audience? Because it took me a bit to understand. And I think it's really important to understand the framework of like what AI really is as a language learning model and why it's actually bad at math. Because I think people are seeing, and I'm even seeing applications related to like AI can do accounting, et cetera, et cetera. And I look at that with skepticism, because of knowing what the real science is behind, or the algorithmic science behind AI. Can you explain that for us a little bit?
So I'm going to do it very high level. AI, the LLMs right now, it's word probability. So it is generating words one after the other and saying, I think this is probably right based on what it learned. So if we're going to ask it to do a math problem, it might distill it to 1 plus 1, and most people finish it with equals 2. And that's right most of the time. They may have some trained data in there that thinks 1 plus 1 is 8. Lovely. That's going to crop up periodically. It's going to hit that track, and then all of a sudden those probabilities are off. And that's why it's bad at math. It's a word tool. It's a language tool, not a math tool. Computers are already good at math. And so there's ways to have the AI complete the steps you need to get those calculations, and then the calculations occur outside of AI. A tool, this one good at this, bad at that, and dropping it in there is the most effective way to do it.
To your point that it will guess at 1 plus 1, and it's a guess, based upon statistical probability. It does not know that 1 plus 1 equals 2. So,
And that's true
uh,
across the board. Yeah.
yes, yeah. So let's kind of dive in here because we talked a little bit from a higher level, but construction businesses, because I think where a lot of people's mindsets, especially smaller mid-market businesses, that the word enterprise may be like too cumbersome, for some folks. And I want to try to break this down, but the reality that I think a lot of people are looking at like, where do I start with AI? And they're looking at the tools. Like that's their first go-to is like, which tool should we be using? And oh, it's a tool game because ChatGPT, OpenAI with ChatGPT and Anthropic with, Claude, they're fighting each other and which one's the best. And people would, reference that Claude's the best one now. And it's all about the tools. And what's your opinion on that? Is that really the right framework on how to think about that? Is that the right place to start?
And we hit this question often. Which one do we want to start with? And that's the wrong question. The tools, to your point, they're changing. Claude's great. GPT is great. Okay, Gemini has an update now. It's the best one. It's constantly rotating. And I don't expect that to stop. And ultimately, you're going to see them continue to dive into certain areas. So you're going to see more niche areas for each of the tools as they start to expand their training data there. So long term out, we might be in a situation where GPT is really good in these industries, and Claude has these industries, and Gemini is focused on these other ones. So you end up needing to really be able to span and change the tools, the LLM underneath, easily. And so for business owners, the question needs to start to become not which one do I choose, but how do I set up my technology and my environment so I can move those around if and when I need to. And there's another piece in there for business owners because it's not only picking the tool, but then it's how do you maintain it and keep it cost effective. If you're tying into some of these models, those new ones are not cheap. But if you can have automations and a setup to use an older model, you're going to save a lot of money. And that steers all the way back to your initial question. Where do they want to start? It's not picking the tool, so what should it be? And the focus around that one is our guidelines, a simple process with low complexity decision making and data in one system. And I want to walk through why that is. The data you feed the AI is going to really dictate its output. Everyone uses AI and they like it and it's cool. And if you're in a chatbot and you're just typing along and it has that regenerate button at the bottom of the answer, you can say, I don't like that answer, give me a new one. Maybe it's closer. Really cool if I'm working in the chat box. Really bad if I'm doing process automation because I don't get that option. So it's just a miss that we have to go back and fix. And the way you control that is you control the input, you control the prompts, and you make sure everything's clean to get it as repeatable as possible. And so that's the piece I think people overlook. You can have a lot of effectiveness in a chat box, and then you start to get it into automation, and it's just a surprise. This is off, and you have to do a lot of cleanup. And that's where people see a lot of the ROI burn. But ultimately, they have not figured out and really scaled down to that low complexity decision making that I can get repeatable and a high level of confidence so I can actually move my hands off it better. The other piece, and I can go on this one for a while,
Yeah.
the other piece is unclear business goals or unclear business expectations. I feel like this goes back to not understanding AI. It's a magic wand. It's not, it's a tool, but then setting right expectations to the team. So it's not come in, I'm going to automate the entire HR department. It's coming in and saying, I'm going to have AI look at this job description and identify resumes coming through this one for these results. Much more focused and much more easy to track. And that's how you get started. One initiative, starting small and seeing what works. Make sure your team's familiar with it and then start to build on that momentum.
I kind of relate this back. You and I had talked about this previously on a call, but um, we had a client, or I should say in a former, before I started this business, um, I worked for a corporation that not huge. We were doing at the time, about 65, 70 million in top line revenue. Um, and the theme of like big data and data analytics was a huge theme. And I feel like that's the thing is we have to be careful because you have these themes that come through business. Like back in the like kind of early 2000s, it was all about big data, big data, big data. And then it became about, and like they just changed the marketing term and it became analytics. And then now it feels like AI is that big push. And then even like the themes of AI, whether it's agentic or not, et cetera, like it's a constant evolution. And so it can be really easy to get trapped up. But for our audience, I'll put it this way. I think I witnessed something personally that, our senior leadership team at the company that I work for, everybody wanted dashboards because they thought, having this data at my fingertips is going to make me such a better executive and make better decisions that will grow our business and be able to produce a more profitable business. And so we went about developing all that. We brought in outside consultancy. We built a bunch of Power BI dashboards and did everything and built out all these custom things. And we spent close to $250,000 to get, like each user base, like a sales director, what do they need? What do they need? And I will tell you that that was 5 years ago. And I guarantee you that that company doesn't use any of that going forward anymore because it, it like the reality of even changing human habit, that was one thing to consider was people still make many decisions on their gut, but at the end, they didn't ask that question that, okay, if you had this data at your fingertips, Ryan, would it actually change the decision that you would have made if you had it regularly available and that, for how much you're going to spend to get it, like, would it actually change the outcome? And would you make decisions differently? And oftentimes the answer to that was no. And so it's, you can get on this theme, but you still have to build the business case, right?
You nailed it. And to your point, KPIs and dashboards, a lot of companies like them, want them, they use them, but it can be really hard to establish an ROI around it. The spots that I see that really get effective is how does someone know that they're doing a great job? And we see this usually coming to companies that are stepping into EOS, and so they're starting to apply those key KPIs on a per role basis. I see a lot of effectiveness with those because they're seeing immediate feedback. Am I on track? Am I not? And there's very little wiggle room ultimately because it's coming out of the system. So those have seemed to be useful. To your point though, Mason, if it's, hey, here's information from someone who kind of like be nice once a month and they're not really pulling into the decision making and there's no human behavior shift to actually adopt. Yeah, whether it's AI, whether it's dashboards, whether it's software, if people don't end up using it, if it's not the easy path to help them move faster, they don't.
I think one thing you said too was the reality. I think people underestimate one just from an effectiveness, but because like if you use Claude today, it's pretty cool how it has the features that show you its workflow, right? Like how it's thinking, like the steps that it takes. And that's really cool. But we have team members that hit the limit on daily Claude usage regularly. Like they hit the limit and you pay money for Claude. You can use free versions of it, but to actually get enterprise use of it, you pay money. I do believe that their pricing model is going to get even worse soon because they still want user bases on it. And so for our audience, like those algorithms, they wanted to get as many people on them as quickly as possible, but eventually Anthropic's got to make money, right? And so they're going to have a pricing model for usage, but the units to pay for, if you give it unclean data, I would be really interested to see over time how many units you're going to pay to process that data with their pricing scale going up over time, that dealing with unstructured, unclean data versus if you took the time to have really clean data and gave it to it, how much more efficient, and you'd actually have a cost savings in AI application. And so this is really where I find that, Ryan, your expertise comes in is, like you said, that you got to build the business case, but say somebody has the business case, you brought up that setting up the data structure is incredibly important to get, good effectiveness out of this. Where does, say, like a 30 or $40 million top line general contractor, where do they start with that? Like if they never heard of a data lake or a data warehouse or these other things, like where in the world do they start with all this? That they got their accounting system, they got Procore, they might have a separate CRM, but like, what do they do? Where do they go?
So much in there. I think where to start because there's a couple different areas I want to hit along it. Where do they actually want to begin on their AI journey? And the first thing you want to try to explore is where are my big cost centers? What are my business areas that AI can help? And so that's the first step. Is this AI journey going to be worth the squeeze? Is it worth the effort? What is that going to look like? And a lot of companies just want to jump in and start building. They think that there's huge returns. They see that with some of their counterparts and they just want to go. But taking that, and it's not, I'm not, Mason, I'm not talking quarters or years. I'm talking 2 weeks to figure out here's our big wins. What will that look like? And how do we build a path to those? The second question on data and prep and all those pieces, that's going to go way back into what does my environment look like? How long do I want to be on the software? Do I have an upcoming ERP migration come in? So even as you start to identify where the wins will be, you want to identify your company, its growth, and where and when the right time to build out certain areas will be. I will say we are seeing a lot of effectiveness on using existing tools with AI and being able to integrate those together and then providing the data into the AI to leverage across those platforms. So what that means to a business owner, you can push out that time you're on different systems potentially significantly before you have to step into a larger ERP. Really big cost savings, allows you to scale and move it on your processes much longer than otherwise, and potentially avoid some pretty rough migrations on software systems. So there's a couple areas we've seen AI be really effective in helping increase that life cycle, if that makes sense.
I mean, I just got off a call earlier with, a construction organization has multiple, it's multi-state, they have multiple locations, and they did, an ERP, upgrade, which they're on QuickBooks Desktop, so they still need an ERP upgrade. But they did an ERP upgrade, and it should not be taken lightly. We've helped clients with ERP implementations, and it's no less than a 6 to 12 month endeavor to get it, to where it's fully functional. And I mean that to anybody, that if you're arrogant and bold enough to think that, oh, you're going to get it done perfectly in 3 months, heck no. It is probably more like a 9 to 12 month, like fully functional. You can have some functionality within 3 to 6 months, but like true normal functionality is a 9 to 12 month endeavor. It's not easy. It could be very painful. You will lose team members in the process. You will have to hire new team members. And so to that point, I love that business cases, there's a lot of tools that, like, in order to get it into your ERP, like you enter it in one tool, then you have to like download a CSV, format it, and then get it over into your ERP somehow. And I'm sure AI can, fix some of that process to make that synthesis better. Am I right?
Yep, absolutely. And so moving the data between the systems is one piece. Getting your data centralized outside of those systems so you can feed it into AI is another. And if you're hitting one, you can normally hit the other, if that makes sense. So again, go back into positioning. How do you want to set up that environment to share the data? How can you then feed that into AI securely, cleanly? And then all of a sudden you're off to the races. And doing your AI as a platform like that also means when you do change those software systems, your AI doesn't have to necessarily shift. So you're increasing the life cycle on your build out costs for the AI. So if you're going from QuickBooks to Sage, cool, great, solid, and you handle that new Sage software system into your data consolidation location, same AI working, just to do it new endpoint for it. So there's some really flexible ways to set those pieces up.
So walk us through that. So for our audience, what Ryan is talking about is, I think a lot, for a lot of our audience members, they could be looking at their ERP, their accounting system, say if they're in construction and Foundation ERP is the tool that they use. They're looking at that as their database, right? And then they have Procore, they maintain some data, they want integration between the two, but they look at those as their data hubs, their databases. What you're talking about is creating outside data storage. Can you explain that and summarize that for us, Ryan? Like, what does that look like? What does it take to be able to do that? What's the infrastructure like? What should, a business leader expect to get that set up?
And so outside data storage, most people will call it a data warehouse or a data lake, something along those lines, and they're really powerful. And so you'll start to see them clean up the data and integrate your systems, but they're also not cheap. So depending on the platform that you're on, you might see a data source ad go from anywhere from $5,000 on the low side to 15 to 20 on larger ones. But the win is you're able to move and manipulate that data outside of just the system it's in, which means you can blend that data with other data sources you're adding, which is what just about every work process that it's going to do something fun or interesting ends up needing. So take QuickBooks, for instance. We can log time there. We got financials. It's a powerful system for that. But if I'm wanting to do something to better understand the customer journey through my organization, I might need the CRM data tied directly into the invoicing data to really see that full journey through the company. That's what that consolidation is going to start to allow you to do. And all of a sudden, those relationships get really powerful.
And for our audience, like, I look at it that often a difficult thing is that you could have, for a particular job, you could have some job related data residing in Procore. You could have data, especially showing the communication engagement, how often, touch points have happened with the client, with the building owner, related to that job in your CRM. And then you have all of the historical job costing within your ERP. And the thing is, none of that is linking together except that there's a common key that it all relates to a job code. But like, you can't actually put that into some synthesis unless you were to get all of the data sitting in those systems into a outside data storage, data lake, data warehouse. And then it's all connected by that key. So then you're able to go look up that, hey, job 654321, what's the last time, when's the last time our PM, reached out to them, and that where are we at on total cost versus budget, and what's our schedule for the rest of the job. And you could have that at your fingertips, but you'd be able to synthesize that once you get the data out of those, those siloed systems. Am I getting that right, Ryan?
You nailed it. Exactly. And so what we find is not only does the data getting side by side give you better reporting, better understanding, but when you start to feed it into the AI and you can percolate it back, the duplicate entry starts to be reduced because you have that integration handling it and not navigating it for you. The handoffs between the systems get easier. So there's just a bunch of different ways it starts to benefit the company.
I love what you mentioned earlier too, because I'd love to you've given us some ideas to what it looks like about creating better data structure, but you also started off, and I don't want to miss that, you started off with giving a good business use case. And it kind of reminds me, even again, we're not talking about dissimilar things, even in regards to like when companies had big ideas on data analytics, right? That people would, I think it's very easy to think about, oh, like, what are all the possibilities of what AI can do? Like, oh, it could potentially, help me do this that I don't even ever do that task on a regular basis. You just kind of think of like, how cool would it be to do that, But is that really how your day functions? And you gave an example of, look at what you're already doing. That's just a freaking time suck. Like you may have somebody manually having to take something from Procore and get it into, your ERP system, or taking something from your credit card or your expense management tool or application into your ERP system. And what if AI could automate that? And so it sounds like, you're kind of suggesting that look at the low hanging fruit of just stuff that you can automate with AI, because you can eliminate somebody having to do that manual load. Is that what I'm hearing?
You nailed it. And here's the thing around approaching it that way. You're looking for reasonable expectations, ultimately. If it's something that's straightforward, low complexity on decision making, but still some decision making, you can usually have AI hit that. And then you're actually on the table with something that's realistic. I think a lot of companies still want to do a lot of different areas, and they set the ROIs around those and the business objectives to hit that, and they don't get there. And then they see you see the news, this one didn't hit the mark. We need realistic expectations for the tool. It's not a magic wand.
I feel like that's a nice way to get buy-in too, that you see little bites, because I I think what's tough for a lot of business owners is they're trying to figure out, like, how do I use AI at scale to help me create differentiation? And I don't know that that's the answer, because every company is actually chasing that. So I don't know if you actually be differentiated, right? Um, I think it has more to do with like, how do you harness it as a tool to be more effective in what you're doing and focus on your strengths, right? That you shouldn't be spending time doing manual activities, and it can be a great resource for doing some of those manual activities, and go for some of the low hanging fruit.
I'm 100% with you on that. And what we find is the smaller steps help tremendously. If you go and try to build something large and drop it in place, any misses are going to show up in a really painful way. If you're doing small incremental deliverables to your team, a few things happen. One, you get quick feedback on that step. Is it effective? Is it not? Is it actually producing the ROI? So you're catching a miss really early on. So you're not out a lot of money. Your team is seeing this, something useful, saves me 30 minutes a day, but I'm using it because it's the easy way, it's the quick way. I didn't drop them in an entirely different ecosystem. We're not trying to change all the software. We're not moving them around that much. It's an easier piece to swallow. So the adoption increases. And then you're getting the team used to seeing that trickle of changes across the organization. And change management adoption is a muscle just like anything else in your organization. So the more they use it, the more they get used to it. And you don't run into the same issues around job security or resistance to it, because it's just another little piece, that a tool in their toolbox that they can use very quickly. So it helps a few different ways that are not technical, if that makes sense.
I'm interested because we've been exploring like where should companies start in all this of actually figuring out the use cases of AI, how to harness it, especially around the data structure, whether to start with tools or whether to start with data. And I think we've given some roadmap here. Um, I know from my experience, like it could be very not everybody's gifted in managing a project. That there are a lot of companies with team members that I think you and I both know that there are people that will inherit a process and they are great at continuing that process from then on out going forward. And then there are people that can actually make the process. And those are two different people that, succeed in that. Sometimes it can be really tough because a particular process can hit multiple departments, right? And so you really are talking about change management, as well as project management, but change management for a lot of different people involved, and that may mean that you have to coordinate a lot of people and get everybody on the same page. And I guess what I'm trying to get at is that sometimes, to actually have AI be utilized to work on some of those manual activities, like there's quite a bit of project and change management that has to happen. What would you suggest to business owners that how do you accomplish that well to where the business owner isn't going to get sucked into having to manage a change project, but getting their team members to execute it and to follow through? Like what would you suggest for them to see success with that?
So I'm gonna kind of repeat the question, and as I understand it, there's a lot of effort in going in and doing any sort of AI initiative. So how do you get that rolling without it sucking down the owners or the C-suite's time? Is really the question. And there's a lot of different ways to go about that. Our favorite is looking at companies and identifying or adding in a AI champion, and they help do the projects. And so their team may have a project manager around it, but there's one team, one person who's owning the AI across the company. And we do that for a lot of reasons. There ends up being a lot of crisscrosses on dependencies. When do we need the data structures by? Which integrations do we need to move forward with? All those different areas across it before it can be effective. The other piece it does, it starts to get early feedback. Now, and that's to start the initiative. So they define the business goals, they help make sure everything's in line up to it, the tech starts to show up. The other piece around that is change management. So kicking out the project and making sure the business case is there is one person's responsibility across the company. The other one is how do we get people involved to ease that change management? And there's many different change management strategies. Our favorite is generally the champion. So finding someone on the team. Let's say we're going to the accounting team and we need to we're using QuickBooks automated AR. Cool. It's going to save some time. We need to turn that on and get the team used to it. It's figuring out who on that accounting team is a center of influence, who can champion that idea, get them involved early. So this is not something that they've had no input on, but it's something they've worked with the team to enable and configure and set up and test. And then they can go to the rest of the team and with confidence and authenticity say, this is working, it's saving us time. Here's how you do it. That does a few things. The person on the team is going to be much more credible than anyone else coming in. It makes it the team's baby early on, which means they want to use it. And it lets the team know someone they already have relationships with, they're already familiar with, they're already going out to lunch with on who to ask questions. So that 5 minute, do I go by and ask it? And the resistance around that disappears because they already know.
Yeah, I just know that that could be a challenge in regards to how do you execute and making that champion, and getting those teams wrapped around it, but making that internal champion that I guess the question is, Ryan, do you have some tips on how do you prevent that person from getting bogged down? Because I feel like they may have other work activities and responsibilities, right? Like a lot of companies with say 40, 50 million in revenue, give or take, they don't necessarily have the budget to just have somebody who's solely focused on AI. Like that's their job, right? Like they probably are assuming some other responsibility. So what would you say for them to make sure that they don't get bogged down in regards to, how many initiatives they're working on and not actually bringing things to success? Like what would you say is the best practice?
So, how do you juggle these versus anything else with your day to day work?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep. Then same piece. It's allocating the time, it's having the discipline to do it. There's no magic wand on being able to free up some of that effort, if that makes sense. But it is helping them and the team member understand the criticality to the company, proper prioritization, and then making sure there's the slack in their schedule to do it. If they're booked, you know, 50 hours a week on a 40-hour schedule, that may not be the right choice for the AI champion, regardless of if they really like it. Strangely enough, some of the best AI champions we've seen have not been technical. They don't care how LLMs work. They're not the ones jumping through all the different flavors of AI, but they're the ones who are helping make sure it's hitting the business goals and helping prioritize it on the business needs versus the technical needs.
I love that because that was going to be the next question I asked is, okay, you can choose a project champion. I think a lot of business owners may go look for the techie, but if you're thinking about somebody who's going to have to be able to execute cross departmentally and actually get initiative done and hold it accountable, that may not necessarily be the right person just because they're a techie and they love it. And so I love that you gave an example of, some elements that a business owner should be looking for in a team member to potentially help it be successful. So I love that.
Yeah, it's been very interesting to see that really crop up because the technical people will be there. They're going to be attracted to the new toys, but having the business driver around it does help quite a bit.
Well, to kind of, because we're kind of coming to a close for this episode, I'm sure that there's so many elements of this we could go on, for so many hours on this. Just kind of a final note, because I think it's really relevant that data security, considering all of this, right? That we're talking about building quality data infrastructure, but you are sitting AI on top of a company's data. That it's not just that you're using it to craft a job description, or you're using it to help you craft an email that doesn't include non-confidential proprietary data, et cetera. Like we're talking about this is your treasure chest of data that coming from your ERP, everything about your projects, et cetera. It could who knows, it could include payroll data, employee data, et cetera. What would you say are some of the first starting points that business owners should consider to make sure that they are initiating AI initiatives, especially if they're bringing forward a project champion, that just the considerations of making sure that it's done in a secure way? What should they be thinking about? What considerations should be on the table for them?
I like this question, and I like the way you position it because getting information and context to AI happens a couple different ways. You can use training data to understand it. That's pros and cons. You can provide it that context, that data in real time when you need it. Pros and cons. And so there was a story early on from a company who launched Copilot, and it digested all of the spreadsheets and documents, et cetera, in their environment. Cool. It's a good way to get training data. It also ingested from the HR side a spreadsheet that had everyone's compensation and with no security around it. And then you could ask that AI, hey, what's so and so make? And it shared it straight up. Here you go. So there's a piece where understanding what you want to train the data over, how you're going to provide it to it is important. But it's just along the same lines on what data is secure in your environment. Strip it out. So you're not training that data into it. You're training on processes. You're training on understanding. And then you're going to provide that more sensitive information in real time. And that helps a few ways. It helps make sure that the person who's providing that information has the right permissions because otherwise they can't get to it. And so it's sourced appropriately. And then you only have to secure when you provide that information. So, going to go in all the way back to we can change different LLMs. I have one workflow that may be using ChatGPT. Great. And it's going over there, and I have certain security permissions for that. I have another one that's using much more sensitive information. I have that one going to Claude and with a different configuration and different level of security. And so getting to that granularity on understanding your data and your setup can help provide the rest. And you want to do that because there's normally a significant price difference if you want to secure one versus otherwise.
How does that even work? Can you kind of drill down on that for us a little bit more, Ryan? That, like how do you set up that data security and yet still have AI on top of it? How do you restrict AI from accessing certain data points? What does that look like in real life?
I'm going to geek out a little bit and talk a little bit
Yes,
about agent design.
please do. Please
Yeah.
do.
So ultimately, what we're saying is, hey, I have this data over here that I didn't train in the app because I don't want it to have all. I don't want everyone who's in the app to be able to access that information. So I need to provide it in real time. If you have a fully integrated system, or even if you don't, if you don't still go into the chat box and you're dragging and dropping stuff over to it, you can say, I need a spreadsheet for this information. I'm moving financial information over. I'm going to be in Claude. Claude's already configured not to train the information. You can have that Claude server running wherever in your environment. The team knows it's there. But if the user is Bob, Bob can only provide the information he has access to. So whether he's exporting a spreadsheet or whether he's clicking through and saying, pull this from my data warehouse, wherever I'm consolidating that information, we can track Bob's permissions through that, if that makes sense. And so he's only providing it to the area that will he's only providing data that he has access to, and he's only providing it into the AI that is secure for it. And the important piece around this, because it's the easy path. If he's logging into one spot and he can go get the data for him, Mason, I don't know about you, but I'm lazy. If I don't have to go export out that spreadsheet, figure out where it is, find it in my downloads folder, drop it on somewhere else, I don't want to. I'd rather click one time, have it pull. And so if you set that up for your team, it's one click, data's there, good to go, and it's the secure path, it's the safe path, it's the path you want them to use, adoption is much easier.
So a lot of it's going to be around setting the right user permissions for that user access to the data. And as they're using tools like Claude, et cetera, that it just already the data is restricted itself, that they would only have access to the data that they're allowed, and that they could push that into Claude then because it's set at the user profile. Correct? Correct in what I'm saying?
Correct. And if that data feed is integrated into Cloud at the company level, you've also preset the configuration for security. So you're not worried about Cloud training on that information because it's already been set up properly.
We're probably going to need to have another episode where we geek out on that even further, because that is the one area that, it is important to consider. I don't, for our audience, I don't want to scare everybody. Let's use AI as a tool, but at the same point, we have to make sure that we're using a secure way that, can't be tapped and accessed, that, again, like AI can be very creative, that you can go ask it questions that you may not have been able to ask other tools before. And you'd be surprised that, if you ask it the right way, it may pull a data point that you would have never known that was available to you. Right. And so, I probably want to go on that on a different episode here, Ryan, but I love kind of how you've built out some use cases for us that, especially for construction businesses that, focus a lot on, existing manual tasks where you're having to manipulate data between systems, and that way you can get more runway out of your existing systems as best as possible. I love that. Because new ERP implementations suck and are costly and terrible. But also that is a quick win, right? I mean, if you can automate that somebody's doing something manually, that's a quick win. You give us insight in regards to outside data storage, and that the starting point is not the tools. The tools are forever going to be evolving. It's about building the architecture of your data and your system so that any new tool development can sit on top of that and be as successful as possible. So I love that, Ryan. What else, or is there anything else that you feel like you'd love to leave our audience with? Because we are going to have a second episode on just data security alone. But what final notes would you like to leave our audience with today?
I like to start with three. If there's three things you take away from my talks, start small, scale fast. So pick a small initiative, very clear business goals, and try and build that out. Your data, your AI is only ever as good as your data. So figure that piece out before you start. Here's what I need. Here's the systems I want that data from. And then be very conservative on your estimates. It's a tool. It's not a magic wand. So understand what you need to do very clearly and the processes around it. And you'll find you'll hit the mark much better then.
Ryan, where can our audience learn more about you? How can they get in touch with you?
Please go to website, terictechnology.com. You can also hit me on LinkedIn. We'd love to talk AI. We do a free hour consultation for companies who are just curious. Happy to dive into it and really better understand your company, you, and how AI can help.
Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Ryan, for delivering such, insightful, examples for us of AI usage and AI practicality for, mid-market construction businesses. So hopefully the audience enjoyed this. This is one of many episodes we're going to be doing on AI and how to apply AI inside your construction business. And so super appreciative, Ryan. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to have you on for another one, and hope to see everybody soon again. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Hi, everyone. So if you enjoyed today's episode and you found value, or it raised some questions for you about the next best steps for managing your finances in your construction business, please reach out to us at bradycfo.com. There's a contact page there where you can fill out, and that will come straight over to us. Either that, or you can personally find me on LinkedIn. My name is Mason Brady, and feel free to send me a message, and happy to chat and talk through anything you're facing today, and happy to provide some advice. So thank you all. Appreciate it. See you.